Our expert will join the session soon, within 5 minutes. So all the participants are requested to please connect it with the link. We'll soon start the session.
Hi, good morning.
Okay. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
On behalf of Department of Information Technology, Sri Shankaracharya Technical Campus, I, Dr. Dolly Shukla, Associate Professor, Department of Information Technology, would like to welcome our today's speaker, Dr. Gaurav Vashne, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of CSE, IIT Jammu. For today's session, I will take the session on web security. A brief profile about Dr. Gaurav Vashne, sir. Dr. Gaurav Vashne is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Indian Institute of Technology, Jammu. He completed his MTech and PhD from IIT Roorkee and has worked in various security research labs at SUNY Albany, NY, USA, SUTD, Singapore, and University of Newcastle, Australia. He also worked as an engineer at Qualcomm, cybersecurity consultant at NIIT Limited, and as an assistant professor at NIIT University, Neemrana. His research interest includes web security issues, network security, anti-phishing, secure authentication, and memory forensic applications, etc. Dr. Gaurav recently got appreciation from the CEO Uday for his contribution in the security of Aadhaar QR codes and is working on various identity and access control projects. I once again welcome and invite Dr. Gaurav Vashne sir in this 6-day induction program on cybersecurity and autonomy for this session. Once again, welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Uh, Good morning to all of you. In today's session, I'll be very interested in discussing some of the important issues with respect to web security. We'll be going through the concept of web cookies, and we'll try to see from a perspective of a hacker as to how the concept of web cookies can be utilized for privileged access. We'll also see some of the attacks that relates to cross-site scripting. What are different types of cross-site scripting that can happen? And because the theme is cyber autonomy, we'll try to look into the perspective of how the concepts of web security, web attacks, how can they be automated in a manner that they can be misused as well as used in the right direction. So, for example, the concept of cookies, we'll see some of the attacks. So we'll see that there is a possibility of automating that process. So we'll be able to identify those websites which can be, say, for example, compromised with specific type of attacks. Then the second thing comes up is that if they can be hacked or if they can be attacked, then can we automate the process of detecting those vulnerabilities, those exploits, and then can we actually detect them proactively? So both the things open up when we discuss the part of autonomy, and we'll see that how these things go hands in hands. So we'll start with the concept of, we'll use some of the tools in this lecture. Three of the tools include Wireshark. Most of you might have used it. You're working in the domain of security or networks. The second tool that we'll be using is a network miner. So it's also a very good tool. It tries to mine the network for, you can find out the host, you can scan the hosts which are on the network. You can actually filter out the network traffic which is going from your system. You can filter out the traffic with respect to even the protocols which are at the application layer. You can filter out the traffic with deep packet inspection, which means that you can see the contents of the traffic and then you can filter them out. We'll see the third tool, which is a proxy tool, which is Burp Suite. We'll use Burp Suite to actually dig more into the HTTP traffic and see the patterns. And then we'll use regular browsers, Chrome or Firefox, and their tools, their developer tools in this process. And we'll try to understand from a more applied perspective as to how the concept of cookies can be misused. And we'll see some examples, real life examples of some sites which can be compromised with the use of, say, the cookies, right? And then we'll move to the cross-site scripting part. So I'm just shutting off my camera so that we can focus on the screen. Okay, so this is Burp Suite, right? So there are so many modules in Burp Suite, and this is basically a proxy which provides you an intermediate access to the web content traveling from your browser or from anyone's browser to the exact server. So, for example, let's suppose if a browser is contacting a server which is Google, and that browser is configured to use Burp Suite as proxy, then all the traffic which is moving from the browser to the end server will be proxied and available to this tool, which is Burp Suite. So let's take an example. I am trying to access a site, say htmlstandard.com, and I can see that I am able to see what exact HTTP traffic which is moving from that machine, right? So I can have multiple options. I can forward the traffic. I can drop this packet. So basically, what's happening is that the browser is generating that traffic because the browser is trusting this as a proxy, this tool as a proxy. It's able to actually see the traffic, and then it forwards the traffic to the actual web server to which it is meant for. Two, three things important here is that even the traffic is HTTPS, as you can see, we are still able to get an access to this traffic. Now the question comes up is how we can be man in the middle when the traffic is over HTTPS. So the answer is very simple. The traffic which is moving from the web browser to the actual web server is actually TLS, it's HTTPS. The difference is that when you trust the proxy as the intermediate man in the middle, as a browser, you establish two TLS connections, one with the proxy, and proxy establish a TLS connection with the actual web server. So what happens is there are two times, so one-time decryption at the web proxy, and that's how you're able to see the traffic in clear text, right? This is not possible if you are trying to do a network packet sniffing. So if you're using Network Miner or if you're doing the packet sniffing through Wireshark or TCP dump, then you won't be able to see the application layer traffic, which is encrypted with TLS, if you are not using a proxy. Right? The proxy is the only way you can actually see the traffic, a TLS encrypted traffic between two end systems. And that's because one of the end systems is trusting the other one as a proxy. So that's why we are able to see the contents in clear text, whatever is traveling between two systems over TLS. So you can forward the traffic, and that's possible. So for example, if I'm accessing, say for example, google.com on my browser, so we can see that there is a request which is going to google.com. The host is google.com. It's a GET request, and it's going on HTTP 1.1 and various headers, GET headers, which are various HTTP request headers, which are required by the eventual web server. You can also track the response to this request. So basically, once you forward it, you can see that there's a response which is coming up, and this response is actually saying that the location has moved to the specific location for that specific URL which I've searched. So then the browser will move to that location and it will fetch that specific content. So this is one thing. Now the second tool that we are going to use is the Wireshark. So me share the entire screen. Yeah. The next tool that we'll see is the Wireshark. So here we can see the network traffic which is traveling between end systems. So one is my end system, then the whatever traffic is generated by my end system is visible. So you can do a lot of dissections here. So for example, if this is the packet, then maybe what you can do is you can see source port number and you can say that, okay, I want to just get those packets which are having UDP source port number as 53361. You can also do such kind of filtering at the IP layer as well. So for example, you can say that I want to look forward to IP packets where the protocol is say 17, which is UDP. So I'm looking forward to only packets of IP which are having UDP data traveling over them. We can also go forward and do Ethernet filtering. So you can say that I'm looking forward to packets where the Ethernet destination MAC address is this. Not only that, you can actually do filtering in this manner, you can also do filtering at the HTTP as well. So you can say that I'm just looking for traffic which is say HTTP in nature, right? So only the traffic which is HTTP, which means that the application layer data which is traveling on top of the packets and HTTP payload. You can also go forward and look forward to specific headers of HTTP contents and things like that. For example, you can actually say that I'm looking forward for cookies which are there in this specific connection. Now, this is the second tool that we'll be using. And the third tool that we'll be using is the network miner. So this is the network miner. This is again one of the tools which is very good for security enthusiast. It's able to scan the network on which you are connected, and it can actually give you a lot of information about the things which travel on the network between end systems. It's a kind of spy tool, you can say. You can put it on one system from where all the traffic is going, and you can set some primitives, and then this tool can actually fetch out all those primitives that you've set for that specific connection. The only problem with respect to the Wireshark and with respect to the tool which is a network miner is that these tools only work on unencrypted traffic. So once the traffic is encrypted, then you get a problem. So basically, you cannot work on encrypted traffic with these tools, right? So we'll look forward to what we can do with encrypted traffic and what we can do with unencrypted traffic. So our first exercise is to understand the concept of cookies. So we'll go forward and see that how the things work. For that, I'm using a Chromium browser. So this is experimental browser running with the Burp Suite. So basically, whatever I do here is being proxied over Burp Suite, right? So whatever I do here, it goes to Burp Suite and then it's proxied. So I'm able to actually access everything which is moving. As an example, and just for the sake of understanding the concept as a part of learning, we'll take an example of how we can get access to the cookies which are traveling on the network, and how someone can misuse them, and what are different ways in which the same can be used. So let's take an example of this site. So this site is one of the sites which is used for maybe journal publication and things like that. Having a vulnerability that it uses static session IDs for the auto logins, right? So the concept of cookie is very simple. So basically what happens is that you, because the HTTP is stateless, you cannot understand which user visited you at specific point of time. For example, let's suppose if I am visiting Amazon.com, say at this point of time, and then after 2 minutes, I again visit Amazon.com. So Amazon.com don't have any track of whether it is Gaurav or whether it is someone else, right? So to make sure that that does not happen, that there should be a track that the stateless HTTP becomes stateful, we use cookies, right? And these cookies are nothing, they're a kind of storage, a kind of secret information which is stored in the browsers, so that whenever the user visits the same site again, the browsers send those secrets to the web servers so that web servers can recognize that session, recognize the previous sessions, right? So for example, if you see this specific site, you can see that if I go to the cookies part of it, I can see that these are the cookies which are set by the web server to my browser, right? And then this is a mutual protocol. The protocol is that whenever the same domain or the same site will be visited at the browser, it is the responsibility of the browser to actually take out all those cookies which were set by the web server in the previous communication and send it back to the server in the request, right? So if you want to see that, how we can see, so let's suppose if I'm refreshing this specific site, I refresh this specific site and I'm opening Burp Suite, and I'm just intercepting is off and intercept is on, and I'm refreshing this site, right? So once I refresh this site, I'll be getting a intercept here, right? So I can see that I'm getting an intercept that there is a GET request which is going to this specific site, right? Now, important thing to note here is that you can see here that the cookie is traveling. So this is the same cookie which was set by the server in the previous communication when we actually access the specific website, right? So we have been given this specific session ID and this specific unique visitor code by the website when we visited it last time. And then when we are visiting it again, browser is fetching out that information from the cookie storage. And where the cookie storage it is here. So here you can see that this is the actual storage of the browser for this specific domain at this point of time. And we can see that the cookie is set, and these are the two cookies. These are some cookies which are locally set by the browser, and it's going for a different domain name. So the cookies which are going to the same domain, which is set, which is this specific domain which where we are visiting. So what will happen is that the browser will take out those cookies and it will send it to the web server, and then the web server will be able to identify that, okay, these cookies belong to a previous visit of the user X. So that's why it's user X, and then I have to load the contents that user X has visited. Take an example of Amazon, right? So let's suppose if you are on Amazon and you visited Amazon 5 days back, and you were looking forward for, say, for example, Samsung Galaxy phone. Now the Amazon has recorded that information that, okay, you have visited all these mobile phones, and it has given you a unique code, and it has given back to the browser. Browser stored it as ad cookie, right? Advertisement cookie. Once you revisit Amazon again after 5 days, browser take out that cookie and send it back to the Amazon. Amazon matched with the existing cookie. It identifies that, okay, this user has visited Samsung phone, so let's show the Samsung phones on the front page, right? That's how the complete business of advertisement works. And cookies not only help in advertisement, it helps in tracking the user movement between websites as well, right? Now, one of the use case of cookies is that why we should ask the username and password again and again, because we know that this user has already supplied us the username and password in the previous visit. And let's not bother the user by asking username and password again and again, and use the same cookie that we have set in the previous session, if it is available with the browser, as a way of authentication. And that's exactly what's happening here as well, because when you're refreshing this page, you need to understand that when you're refreshing this page, you're starting a new session, right? So so for example, if I leave this page here, if I come back after a day, and if I try to refresh this page, and if I'm able to get the login of my account automatically, then it means that there is something which is going from the browser, right? Because how the specific server will be able to understand that it is me, or it is this account which has to be loaded. So this means that there is a user side secret which is stored, and it's moving, and this is the secret which is moving. Actually, this is the secret, which is the session ID, and the session ID is being used as a login token. So if I remove the session ID, you will see that suddenly you will get logged out from the session, right? So let's take an example. If I remove this, and if I try to refresh this page by doing intercept off. Yeah, so we are logged out, right? So this means that this cookie information is the information which is helping the server identify the specific user, right? Now let us log in again. So right, so we are logged in, right? So we're logged in as ABCD, fine. And then we have got again a session ID which is here. So one thing which is clear to us is that this specific cookie is helping the user to get a login, right? Which means that if I can provide this cookie, now the question comes up is how the server is able to identify this request from a request which is going on from any other browser, right? So there is no way of identifying that difference. The difference identification is only done with the help of this information, which is this cookie ID. If this cookie ID is same, irrespective of which browser session, the browser will believe that it is ABC. The server will believe that it is ABCD. Let's take an example of that. So let us suppose I take out this information from here, right? And I try to create a new incognito window, right? Maybe I might be having an incognito window. No, it's not incognito. So let us have a new incognito window with us, right? And so here there is no one who is having any kind of information stored. So intercept is off, right? So there's no information which is there, right? And we'll try to see that whether we'll be able to get access to someone's account by not providing the username and password, by just providing the session cookie, right, which is stored in the browser. So let us go back to our exercise reviewer. So yeah. Yeah, we are logged in. So let's go to the cookie information, and we see that this is the cookie. We'll just go and copy it. This is the only value, which is the authenticator. And now we have created a incognito window, right? So right, so it's asking for the specific basically it's the incognito window itself. So right. So now it's clear. So basically, we have created a new window. This is a new window, which is not there. And here we'll try to, first of all, create a session. Yeah. And here you can see the cookie information, which is there. So this is the cookie which is set by the server. And from here so this is the current token which can be used, right? And it is a non-incognito window. And now we'll move to an incognito window, which is there. This is the incognito window. It's not, we don't have a login here. We'll try to put this login session ID, this window. And then we'll try to see what happens. So now here you can see that you're logged in. Right? So now this clears our doubts out. So we are pretty much sure now that the only token which is being used by the website for login is a cookie, and that cookie is something that we have actually identified, that this is the cookie which is being used. So one thing is clear, that the idea of auto login, the idea of not allowing user or not requesting users to enter username and password is a very good way, because then you do not bother the user to enter username and passwords again and again. But then it opens another loophole, which is that you have to store something in user's cache, which the browser should resend to the server, so that the server can identify that it is the same user which has already logged in as Gaurav, say for example. Right? So this opens another place where a hack is possible. Now, the question comes up is that how will we be able to access this cookie? Because until unless a hacker is able to access this cookie, he won't be able to compromise an account, right? So he has to get access to this cookie information. Now we were able to access this information because we were on the same browser. So we were able to see that what is the cookie which is set by the server on this user's browser. We got access of it, and we have actually captured it. We have actually re-entered it on some other browser session, and we've shown that okay, this is the only information, and we have an access to it. So I can access Gaurav's account, or I can access anyone's account at this point of time. Now, the important question to compromise an account is that how do you get the access to this token? There are three questions which are coming up with this. The first question is that how many sites are like that? So, for example, first of all, you have to, now this is a part of creating an automation system which can identify sites which have this process of login, right? So first of all, you can identify that okay, there are 100 or 1,000 sites on the internet which follows the exact same way of authorization or of authentication. Now, this is a beautiful start, because if you can identify there are 500 websites which follow the same thing. Yesterday, I identified a very big site which is having the same vulnerability. I actually tried it as well, and it worked. So the thing is like there might be thousands of websites on the internet which are using the login tokens plain in like that as a way for authentication, right? Which is a beautiful start. The first thing. The second thing is, if you can identify 1,000 websites, the second question is how you get access to this token. Now, this is not very easy process. To get access to this token requires a lot of efforts. Now, how you can get that? Let's discuss. One of the way in which you can get that is that if someone is sitting on the network periphery and he has created his computer to work as an intermediate gateway. There's so many ways to do that. ARP spoofing, you create a evil hotspot, things like that, so that traffic moves from your system. So let us suppose that there is a way to do that, and it's the same kind of website, same kinds of login. Then one of the solution to that is if you can actually have your Wireshark running, right? So the information that we're looking forward to compromise a site with a specific account, we just need to know that whether they're following this policy, whether they're using this token as a way for authentication. Second, we need to have the right tool which can snip that from the huge amount of traffic moving on the internet, right? And we can do that. So here is an example of that. So when I was doing all those exercises, I've kept my Wireshark open, and that Wireshark has snipped that traffic which is having an HTTP cookie in it. Let's go inside it. So if I go inside it, I see that the hypertext transfer protocol is there. Inside that, the complete request is intercepted, and there I can see that there is a cookie. And this is the cookie pair, right? This is the same cookie pair which we have used to compromise the account, right? So think of a way in which you can automate this process, that you sit on the network, set certain set of primitives for the network to be sniffed, and then if the primitives are met, then you get the traffic. So I'm not getting a lot of traffic here. I'm getting only that traffic which makes sense to me, right? And that's that having a cookie inside it, right? And then I can do one thing is that I can go to a specific packet, and I can see that this is the specific cookie. I can look forward to this cookie pair, which is there in the traffic, right? So here it's backend. Yeah. So here I can see all those cookie pairs where I can see there is a yeah. So here I can see all the cookie pairs. I can go inside one of the cookie pair, and I'll say that I only want this specific cookie pair with this specific value, right? So I can see from the traffic that I have used the same cookie pair 4 times for logging into the specific site, right? So here it is there, like this cookie pair is traveling. So it's the same cookie pair. And similarly, if you see this one, the same cookie pair which is traveling, right? So similarly, I can actually sniff the traffic for this cookie pair. This is one of the way. Second way is that, let's suppose if I have a tool like Network Miner, right? And I've already set the keywords that I'm looking forward to, which is OJSSID, right? So I can see that I've sniffed the traffic, right? I can see here as well that I've sniffed the traffic. Here I've got the cookie which I'm looking forward to. Beautifully, right? So I can basically sit on any network. I can set my rules for the network sniffing, and then I can do the specific process, right? Lot of attacks are possible to do that. Another question comes up. So it's not the end of the day, because as you have said that, okay, this is possible and you can do that. In a switch-based network, sitting on the network traffic and believing that the network will go through you is totally not possible, because it's a one-to-one communication. So you have to make sure that the network on which you are sitting works in hub mode, right? So that it broadcasts the traffic. And when it broadcasts the traffic, you have a chance to see all the HTTP traffic which is moving between computers, and then you have a chance that you will get a cookie of someone's that you can use. the chances are too less. But then you have to work around to convert a switch-based network to a hub-based network. The third problem that is coming up with this approach is that you can only work on unencrypted traffic. Once the traffic is encrypted, you have no chance of getting any cookie pair or any kind of HTTP header information even in a TLS encrypted traffic or in a HTTPS traffic. So the question comes up is then when it is happening, then how you get access to this session ID token, which you are saying that is very important to compromise an account. So then the answer to this question is if you can establish a proxy communication. Then the question comes up is how you can do that. So for example, let's suppose if you know that in an organization, some of the sites are blocked and people are very keen to use those websites. So what they will do, they will look forward for VPNs, they'll look forward for proxies, and you publish yourself as one of the proxy so that people use your proxy. And once they use your proxy, whatever they do will be visible. So for example, if I go back to the previous history of the proxying connections that we have done, and if we see one of the connection which is very recent, then we'll be able to see that that we were able to see the information which is traveling. So here you can see. So this is the HTTPS traffic which we have sniffed between two computers, and here you can see that we are able to see the information in clear text. Now you say that this is actually an HTTP communication, but can we see on an HTTPS? Yes, we can. So if we move to a more HTTPS-like connection, so for example here, you can see that it's an HTTPS communication, right? And over the HTTPS communication, you are still able to see what is the session ID token for login, right? So that's the beauty. So if you're not able to get the encrypted traffic on sitting as a person there, then you can actually get access another way, right? Which is like when you actually set up someone's computer as a proxy. Just a second, one. हेलो जी हाँ मैं भी मीटिंग में हूँ आपको मीटिंग के बाद करता हूँ So that's how we can actually do that, right? Now this is the second way, like you configure someone's computer as a proxy. But then the question comes up is it feasible? Is it feasible to actually come up to someone's computer and then lure them to ask them to actually configure your system as a proxy? Might not be true, right? People might not be very happy doing that. Then the third thing that comes up is that if I can actually do something more than that, right? Then yes, there are different possibilities to it. And one of the possibility is if I can actually find out a cross-site scripting vulnerability on the site, right? So that if I can do a cross-site scripting vulnerability, if I'm able to run a cross-site script on this website, then there is a possibility that the specific site information is visible to me, right? Let us take an example. So what is cross-site scripting? You're able to run a script on someone's else browser, someone's else website running on the browser, right? So for example, if I say that this is the site, I don't own this site, right? But I am able to run a script on this site. If these conditions are true, then this means that I have compromised this site with a cross-site scripting vulnerability, right? So I'm across the site, I'm not the part of the same site, but I'm able to run a script on that site. Now this is possible because this is possible because I'm actually trying to do it on the web browser, which is again running in the same origin policy of this specific site. And I'm trying to show you that how you can get some information with respect to the cookies which are set by the server on this system by identifying a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So let's suppose if I identify cross-site scripting vulnerability, if I'm smart, I'll try to just say window.alert, say, can you show me the cookies which are there in this browser, right? So I can see that cookie, right? So here I can see that this is the specific cookie which is set by the server on this browser. Very beautiful, right? So if I'm not able to get through Wireshark, Network Miner, Burp Suite, then there is a way that I can get it through identifying a cross-site scripting vulnerability in this specific site. The question comes up is that how easy it is to identify a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So it's not easy. It's very difficult to actually identify a cross-site scripting vulnerability. But yes, if you can identify that not only just document.cookie, you can just wipe off the complete page of this specific website, and then you just put flash any page or do any website defacement, which is possible. Right? So it's not that easy to do. So there are different things which are coming up. Now one more important thing is that we know that whenever this domain is visited on the browser, it is the responsibility of the web browser to actually fetch out the cookies and then send it back to the specific web server. One of the scenario which is coming up is this. So let us suppose if we say that this is the scenario. The scenario is that this is the site which is domain a.com, and this site is trying to access some contents from the web server of domain a.com, right? The process is simple. You do a get, right? And whatever you're requesting, it will return back as in whatever response is requested. Now, this is same origin because the same origin is defined by protocol, port, and host. So the protocol is same, the port is same, and the host is domain.com. So this request is not a problem. What if when you are on domain.com and you have to load an image from domain.b.com? There's a very simple possibility. You have a site and you don't want to copy an image from someone else's site. So what you do is you try to put a link on your site that loads data from someone else's site and show it in an iframe or show it in a specific HTML element. Right? The question comes up is, let's suppose if the user is there on the browser and he's logged in on domainb.com. Let's suppose domainb.com is facebook.com and user is logged in on facebook.com. And let us suppose this is a random site which is trying to load an image from facebook.com. Let us suppose when you're logged in, you have a login cookie set, you have all the privileges in the cookies set. And when the browser will look forward for this specific image in facebook.com, the browser will load all the Facebook cookies which are there and send it to Facebook. So how the Facebook will identify that this request is coming from the user or it is coming from a page which is there on the user's browser looking forward to information from Facebook. Now, if this discrimination is not there, then what will happen is Facebook will start giving your information to everyone. Right? It will start giving information with respect to what you liked, what you disliked to all the third-party applications. Right? And then this will become a data leakage and a big issue. In 2014, we have seen a lot of issues have happened with respect to the third-party applications. Right? So to avoid that, what happens is the web server has to understand that these two requests are coming from different parties. One is coming directly from the user because he is on Facebook, and the second one is coming from a tab which is say running dailymotion.co.uk and then having a HTML element which is loading an image from Facebook. Okay, so how it has to be discriminated? It has to be discriminated with respect to say HTTP headers. One of the example is say origin header. So once you put an origin, once you are on other origin trying to access some information from that origin, then what you do is you actually say that the browser says that, okay, I am not actually the one which is requesting this information from you. It is foo.example, which is interested, for example, in this case, it is domain a.com, which is a domain a.com, which is interested in getting information from domain b.com. Right? So there is a clarity. So if you try to sniff some traffic on Verb Suite, and if you see the traffic difference, you'll see that when you'll visit facebook.com directly, there'll be no origin headers. But when you'll visit the facebook.com because there is a web page google.com requesting some information from facebook.com, then you will see that the origin will be google.com because it is not the user which is doing this request, it is Google which is doing the request on behalf of the user. because the user is there on google.com. So then there is a difference. So origin is a way to identify that there's a different thing coming up. If it is not there, then what will happen is then all the cookies will travel and it will be a problem. Another way of solving that is cross-origin resource sharing. There's a codes policy. Basically, whenever a third-party request goes, then it is the responsibility of this party, domainb.com, to tell the browser whether it is interested in sharing the data with domain.com or not. For example, if you are loading an image from facebook.com in your web page, you are free to do that because it's your page. But Facebook can decide whether it is interested in sharing that information with you or not, because you can always hit facebook.com, but facebook.com can always say that, no, I don't want to give that information. So then what happens is in the codes or the cross-origin resource sharing, what happens is you send some information. For example, let's suppose you say that I am interested in loading an image from facebook.com, but facebook.com has the option to send a specific header which, if not present in the response, the browser will not allow any response from facebook.com to be read by the domain.com, or for example, on the page on which it is requested. That header is known as access control allow origin header. It's the HTTP response header. If the other web server does not respond back with an access control allow origin header, then it means that it is not interested in sharing the information with that specific site, avoiding data leakage or things which can happen like that. Now, one of the way in which you can make sure that even when a request goes to a third party, now this is one of the examples. For example, let's suppose if there is bar.other is one of the host which is requesting this specific information on, for example, we are on foo.example and we have to hit bar.other for this specific data, then this request will go from the browser. But what the browser will do is browser will attach origin as HTTPS foo.example, which means that the browser is doing this request to bar.other because there is a request from on foo.example which requests that information. So then there is an option for bar.other to reply back. So it can reply back that, okay, access control allow origin star, which means that it allows any origin to read the responses. Once it is there, then this XML data which is there is available to foo.example. However, if it does not respond back with access control allow origin, then it means that it is not interested in sharing the information. So any data which is returned by the bar.other on response will not be sent back to foo.example by the browser. Browser will actually restrict that information to be passed to foo.example because browser understand that the other party is not interested in sharing the information at the back. Now, one of the way in which you can also make sure that even when third-party requests are initiated, your cookies do not travel on those requests, right? So there are 2-3 ways in which you can secure the cookies, and we'll see some of them. So let us suppose if we talk about this specific example. So here what we see, here we see 2-3 pieces of information which are very important. So for example, it says that this is the specific token, this is a specific cookie, this is a specific value of that cookie. It's created on this specific date. This is the domain on which it works. It should expire after the session expires. And it's a host only, it's not host only, it's HTTP only. Now this is important. Why this is important? Because when we say HTTP only is false, then it means that this specific cookie is not HTTP only, which means that it can be also retrieved via JavaScript. Now, this is the same reason when I actually written document.cookie, you were able to see that thing, right? So let's suppose if I here write document.cookie, you can see that this cookie is being displayed to me on the browser. Now, this is JavaScript API, right? So the JavaScript is working because this cookie is not HTTP only. It's not HTTP only. It can be used by HTTP as well, and it can be used by JavaScript as well. When we make it HTTP only, let's take an example of that. So if I say that I want to make this cookie HTTP only, which means that I make it to true, then what happens is this cookie will only travel in HTTP requests and responses, but it will not be accessed by any JavaScript API running as a part of the web page. Even as a part of the web page, which means that even if the developer tries to access the cookie, he won't be able to access it because he has said that the cookie should remain HTTP only. So let's try and do it now. So document.cookie. What do you see now? You see nothing here, right? So even if someone is able to compromise the website by identifying a cross-site scripting vulnerability, he won't be able to get any cookie out of that website because the cookies set by the administrator are HTTP only, which means that they will only travel over HTTP. The second important thing that one can do with respect to securing cookies is that the administrator can set those cookies as secure, right? And when I say that this cookie is secure, then it means that the cookie will only travel when there is an HTTPS communication, which means that if I make this cookie as secure, the cookie won't travel in an HTTP communication. It has to travel only over an HTTPS communication. So which means that you actually adding a one level of security more, that if the user tries to do a fallback, which means that the site support HTTPS google.com, but the user types HTTP google.com, even in that case, the browser will not take out the cookies and send it, which will actually avoid any kind of network miners or Wiresharks to have an access of that cookie, because the cookies never travel on unencrypted traffic. It always travel on encrypted traffic, which is a beautiful thing. The third thing that you can do, which is again advancement of the previous one, is that you can make the cookie same site. Now this is something which is very typical. So you say that the cookie is same site when you want to make that the cookie only available to the requests when the requests are done from the same origins. Right? For example, so currently the same site is none, right? There's a most relaxed policy which is possible here, right? But once you make the same site as strict, let's try that in other browser. So let's suppose if I talk about this cookie, and I see that these are all none, this is lax, and this is, let's suppose if I make it strict, right? So it can take three values. The same site attribute can take three values. The first value is none, which means that it is the most relaxed condition. The cookie will be sent to everyone, including the third parties, whenever they request them, whenever this request goes. The second is lax, relaxed. So you can read it as relaxed policy. And the third one is strict. Strict is the most, as the name suggests, the strictest policy which is possible, right? Now, what's the meaning of strict? Strict means that the browser will only take out this cookie. This looks to be an important cookie. That's why it's a strict cookie. The cookie information will only be sent in the request when the domain of the request matches the domain of the cookie. For example, if you see the domain of the cookie, you can see that the domain of the cookie is this, right? So, and if you see the current domain is this. So both are matching. So for example, now if I do a request, if I do a refresh of this page, then I'll see that the cookie will move. So let's take an example of that. So yeah, so here you can see that I'm doing a refresh and I'm able to see this cookie, right? This cookie will move because there's a refresh. But let's suppose if I try to do something else, which means that let's suppose if there is an email coming and I click on a link on that email and believing that the browser, when the browser will load that link, it will actually send those cookies to the web server. This understanding will not work with strict. Let's take an example. So if I say this, because I don't have time to actually do any kind of mail and add in that link, I'll do smart things. So basically, I'll edit this as HTML, and what I'll do is I'll try to use, is that link? Yeah, this link. I'll try to embed this link here, right? And what I'll do, okay, so I've embedded this link here. So if I go here, I'll see somewhere it's here, right? So basically it's here, right? So I've embedded this link on the web page. It's equal to having email and clicking on the link on the email, right? So if I click on here, I'll go to that specific site. So let's click on that link. So if I click on this link, let's forward this. Yeah, so here you can see when I clicked on that link, the request is going to a specific site on the specific get, but I do not see that important cookie being sent by the browser to the web server. Now, this is the beauty of strict. The beauty of strict is that when you set a cookie as strict, the browser is very smart. Browser identifies that you have made this cookie as strict. So any kind of communication which is going to that specific site, which is not direct in nature. Direct means like you're on that site, you're visiting that site, you're clicking a refresh on that site, you're doing any request on that site. If that's not happening, then in that case, the browser does not send the important cookies on those requests, right? So that means that if, let's suppose, this request goes to the web server says that, okay, there is no login cookie request here. So if a person is clicking an email, a link from an email, and if he goes there, he won't get a login session. This prevents a lot of attacks that can happen. For example, if you get a link on the email, you click on that link, there is a CSRF vulnerability on the website, the payload is there, you click on that link and your account deducts 5,000 rupees from your SBI account and send it to someone else. This is possible. But this does not happen if you can actually set important cookies as strict so that any third-party link clicks will not let important cookies to the server. So hence server will not identify you, server will fail, and your identification will not perform any request which comes from a link click or a click of link on advertisement and things like that. So this is an important part of this. Now, if you make it as lax, right? So this is strict. If you make this as lax here, then what will happen is, if you make it as lax, then in this case, if you are doing a third-party click, but if the click is going to the same specific site, then it will work, right? For example, you click a link on the email, and once you click the link, click on the link on the email, you go to the same site, which means that the specific site for which the cookie is meant, then in that case, the cookie will travel, right? In that case, the cookie will travel. But if you're actually trying to access the specific content in the background by an XML HTTP fetch, XML HTTP request, or a fetch API, which is accessing some content in the background from that specific site, like I've shown an example here. Here, like in the backend, you're loading some content from the site. Then in that case, if the cookie is set as lax, then it won't send any cookies. Browser won't send any. And the third part is very simple. The third part is none. So if it is none, then it means that it doesn't matter you are going to that same site. It doesn't matter you're clicking on a web link. It doesn't matter you are loading a content on the background. The browser will send the same cookies to the web server again and again. So it's a most relaxed policy in terms of security. But then it is very good because then you do not get any errors because in this case, the usability is too high. You don't need to actually work around with security because once you increase security, you reduce usability. And once you have good usability, then you have reduced security. A balance is the important part of the whole process. Well, we've started with cross-site scripting. So the cross-site scripting is actually taking a lot of forms. And I've shown you that one of the way in which you can get access to the contents of, for example, important contents like cookie information and other things of a site is by exploiting a cross-site scripting vulnerability on the web page. Now, in terms of automation, we have seen the previous one as well, that you can automate the complete process of either hijacking someone's account, or you can actually automate the complete process of identifying that there is a hijacking which is possible on someone's account, because there's a possibility that a session token can be misutilized or misused for authentication and for a longer duration of time. Right? Similarly, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities can also be automated. There are a lot of tools which are available which can automate cross-site scripting on web pages. And then you can actually identify whether cross-site scripting is there or not, and you can patch those. But basically, what is cross-site scripting? Cross-site scripting is very easy. You read it as across the site scripting, which means that if you can run a site, if you can run a script across the site, then you can say that you have compromised the website with a cross-site scripting. So basically, you do not directly target your victim. You do not go to the victim and say that, okay, I am installing the spyware in your system. What you do is you use an intermediate site as a platform for sending any kind of payload that you want to send to the user. So you don't directly interact with the user. You interact with a vulnerable site, which you identify that has a vulnerability. You upload your payload there, and you wait for the user to visit that site to get infected. Right? So we exploit a vulnerability in a website that victim visits in order to get the website to deliver that malicious JavaScript for him. Yeah. So the only way for the attacker to run his malicious JavaScript in the victim browser is to inject into one of the pages that the victim downloads from the website. So for example, if you know that a user visits facebook.com, you compromise facebook.com, you compromise the user. Right? Let us take an example of that. So let's suppose if there is a site, and on that site there is a input box, and then on that input box you can actually enter anything. You can enter any text. Say for example, this day looks very good, yeah? Or I'm enjoying the current session. So you can write that, and people will come up and they'll see that, okay, you have written that, and they'll comment, okay, I'm also liking that. Now, this is a normal culture of a website, and you use that at various places and chatting forums and things like that. But let's suppose if a notorious attacker identifies that this input box can also consume malicious JavaScript. Not malicious JavaScript, a JavaScript code. So once you identify that, he can actually, instead of writing that this is a good session, he writes that script and then close script, and inside malicious JavaScript, whatever he's interested in. Let's take an example of that. So he writes that script as script window.location and HTTP attacker cookie plus document.cookie and script. This is the payload that he writes instead of on the comment box writing that this is a good day. Now, the database server will store this specific script if the database server is not doing any kind of input validation. Now, once this information is stored in the website, and this is an actual website, it's an actual real site which provides services to everyone. And this real site has a vulnerability that it does not do input validation. A user is smart, user inserted a malicious JavaScript to the comment box, and the database server stored that comment. Now, the regular script of website is that whenever user visits that specific web page, the website just tries to find out what is the latest comment, and whatever is the latest comment is fetched from the database, and it's then printed, which means that a response is created and the response is sent back to the web browser who is actually requesting for it. So let's take a day. You come up on your chair, and then you start typing that specific site which is vulnerable, and you say that, okay, get this specific website, which means that you're typing that specific website on the browser. Once this request goes, the website response scripts actually creates the response, sending back to you. The response is HTML latest comment and database.latest comment, which is this one, and it comes here. Now, what will happen? This will get rendered at the browser. What the rendering will happen? HTML latest comment, script, window.location, and the specific code. Now, what window.location does, it actually changes the location of your window. For example, if you're visiting facebook.com, if this website is facebook.com, then what it will do, it will replace that URL with this URL. And what is this URL? This URL is HTTP attacker, and then cookie is sent as one of the get parameter, and the value is coming as document.cookie. Now, before this is loaded to the browser, just a second. So now when this will be loaded on the browser, this will execute. So the execution will be something like that, HTTP attacker, and this will execute as a JavaScript on the same page. So document.cookie will return whatever cookies are visible on that browser, right? So let's suppose if we're taking an example of the previous one. So whatever cookie, OJ session ID, that will be the cookie information which will be appended to this. And then the browser will load this specific URL. When this URL will be loaded, this specific site will be hit. and this specific site is controlled by the attacker. So basically, the attacker will get a hit on this specific on his specific site, and then this information is visible to the attacker. And what is this information? It's the current cookie on that specific site. So if there is a cross-site scripting vulnerability present in any of the site, and if you know that that site uses login authentication tokens as a way of automatic login, then you can actually compromise all the users of that specific site, because anyone who will visit that specific site will leak his current authentication token to you, and then you can use that token for carrying out any further attacks. There are multiple types of accesses which are possible. There are 4 types of accesses in real, because I am adding the self accesses as one of the accesses which is coming up. So persistent accesses is an accesses where you see that the malicious payload which is there, that malicious payload is stored in the database server, right? So it is persistent until and unless you are deleting that specific payload from the database server. You have no chance of avoiding your users to be compromised with the cross-site scripting vulnerability. The second one is a reflected accesses. So basically, it's not persistent. The payload that is compromising the user is not persistent. It's not stored in the storage, but it's being reflected in the responses by the web server. So basically, it's a reflected accesses. So whatever payload is coming up, it's being reflected by the web server, and that's why it's being executed by the web browser at the end. DOM-based accesses is a kind of reflected accesses where the whatever is reflected is being executed because the DOM or the document object model is made to do so. Right? And then the fourth one is self accesses or self cross-site scripting, which is coming up nowadays. Self cross-site scripting is a way to perform phishing, right? So what is self accesses? You give a payload to the user and you ask your user to run that payload as a part of the website. Once the user does that, user leaks his information. You need user support to do that, and that's why it's a part of phishing, and it's not an automated way of doing a cross-site scripting. That's a self accesses or self cross-site scripting. Now, an example of reflected access is something like this. So basically, in the previous case, you saw that we have stored a malicious payload in database server. And then the response script is actually getting that information from the database server, and then it is actually sending that response to the web browser, which is rendering it. In this case, it is different. In this case, it is like you identify a vulnerability in the website, which is that it reflects input contents, right? So whatever you send in input is being reflected. An example of that is like, let's suppose if you go to a search box of a vegetable delivery company and you type tomato, and then you get back that, okay, tomato is written, but tomato is not there, right? Or you say that, okay, apple, and then you see that apple is not there, right? If you see that the same content which is being sent to the website is being reflected back, then there is a problem. There might be a problem, because why I'm saying that there might be a problem, because we are not very sure that it will also reflect the JavaScript. But because it is reflecting, definitely there is a possibility that it can also reflect JavaScript. So if there is a possibility of reflection in a website, you can always try malicious payloads on that website. So let's take an example of how it works. So let's suppose if there is an attacker, and what attacker has done is that attacker has identified that there is a reflection vulnerability on that specific site. So he has actually created a malicious link which is going to that website, right? And that malicious link he has actually given to his friend or someone he wants to compromise. Right? In the first part, he has created that specific payload. In the second part, the victim, let's suppose on a WhatsApp message, you get a link and someone says, hey, can you click on that link? That it will give you $5,000, say for example. So what happens is once you get that link and the victim clicks on that link, what happens is once he clicks on that link, the payload goes to the website, which is vulnerable already. So when, let us suppose the search is of JavaScript code, and if the website responds back with the JavaScript code, what happens is that response will go to the victim. The response will run in victim's browser. Now this is important. We want that the whole idea of cross-site scripting is that we want that the content should run, the payload should run on the website, on the original website, and also on the platform of the victim's machine, so on the victim's browser. Until unless those two things are happening, we are not getting much of information from the user. So the response comes back to the victim, runs on victim's browser, and when this payload runs on victim's browser, takes out the cookie of the victim on that specific site that it is visiting, creates a window.location, and then hits the attacker server. Once the attacker server is hit, the attacker server is able to get the key information. So we are just showing one part of cross-site scripting, which is like getting secret credentials of someone's account. Cross-site scripting can be used in a variety of ways. You can just deface that website. You can deface the website and put some bad content on someone's website by cross-site scripting, because that script can run a document.write, which can write any content, which can deface the content of that website. Right? So all these things are possible. And then to avoid that cross-site scripting, the best way is to do encoding and validation. For example, if you know that it's very simple, that you know that there need not to be a script here. In the keyword search, you know that there's no point of having a script sent by a user. So why as a website you're reflecting it back? As a website, you can actually say that, okay, there's a script, it does not make any sense. So sorry, I'm not reflecting it back. Please correct your query. Right? So a lot of things that you can do is on validation side, that you can validate what specific input should be allowed or reflected and what specific input should not be reflected. The best policy of avoiding any cross-site scripting is that do not reflect. Do not reflect user input. User is so when you create the threat model of this web, you'll identify that user has to be always kept as semi-trusted or not trusted. You cannot trust your user. User can actually put garbage on input boxes, right? So basically, you need to identify that whatever user is inputting, you cannot just reflect it back. That's the key idea. You have to think about it like you just take the user input, maybe use it for processing, use it, even you do not use it for processing unless you identify that it's not malicious, and then you use it for processing, and then you return back your own results. So validation is very important. Second thing is encoding. So what encoding is that when you know that some of the characters are special characters, why not you encode them as HTML entities or say something else, which when read by the browser, then the browser do not executes it. So one of the idea of encoding is using HTML entities, right? The HTML entities, what it does is whenever you pass, for example, if you pass the script as the input, it will get converted to %LT and then script %GT, right? So we convert them to entity name or entity number, and then we pass it to the server for processing. When the server processes it, server returns back the reflection. The reflection might be something like that. So when the reflection is available to the web browser again converts it to this. But because the web browser identifies that it is coming as HTML entities, the browser will never execute them on the browser. That's the main problem. Because the browser was executing the reflection, the attacker was able to actually access the information that he is interested in. But once the browser is not executing that specific thing, it is understanding that it's just text and it's not code, then the problem solves, because then the browser will not return back. And the complete process can also be automated. For example, when the browser knows that some kind of information which is entered by the user does not make much sense, the browser may itself do some kind of automation and then not let. So even if the site is not helping out, if the site is not supporting any kind of validation, even the browsers can actually help out, and they do input validation automatically when they know that these set of inputs does not make much of a sense and they might be a malicious payload. So a lot of things are possible in this domain which can be done. Now we'll do an exercise. I wanted to do an exercise, but I think because of the lack of the time, we'll not do it today. Maybe tomorrow we can try it out. So in that exercise, what we'll do is we'll use this BWAP, which is Buggy Web Application. Let me show it to you. So the Buggy Web Application is one of the way through which you can actually try out all these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities on so there are a lot of vulnerabilities which are there. It's you can say it's an attack testing platform. You can have a lot of vulnerabilities in a website and you can exploit them. So basically, once you exploit them, you'll be able to understand how you can exploit it in the real world. Because you cannot exploit it in real world. Once you start exploiting in real world, maybe people will not be happy with it. So you use these test beds to actually learn those skills to understand how the sites can be compromised with a specific vulnerability and maybe devise new exploits that can be tried in real world websites over time. So I'll be happy to take some questions now.
If you have any query, then please put it in the chat box.
Yes, sir.
If you participants are requested to unmute their mic for any query. If you have any query, then put it in the chat box, or you can also unmute your mic. I think there is no query. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving us the valuable information and about this web
Yeah, thank you,
security.
thank you.
Thank you so
So
much, sir.
we'll take the further questions and content tomorrow, the tomorrow sessions. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. There's a break of 15 minutes, and our next session will start by 12 p.m. So participants are requested to connect it with this link only, and will resume the session by 12 p.m. Thank you.